This video was brought to you by Ground News. Despite promising to end the war in 24 hours, we're now nearly 100 days into his second term, and US President Donald Trump has proved unable to broker a ceasefire deal between Russia and Ukraine. But now it seems that Trump might be giving up on the process entirely, and last week announced that the US will take a pass on brokering further Russia-Ukraine talks if Moscow or Kyiv, quote, make it very difficult to reach a peace deal. So in this video, we're going to take a look at Trump's ceasefire proposal, why it hasn't been able to stick, and why Trump, who once said know when to walk away from the table, may be about to follow his own advice. Could you rank every single politician in the world? Hear our thoughts and argue with us on our podcast, The World Leader Leaderboard. Find it on the TLDR Podcast YouTube channel or in your favourite podcast app. So let's get straight into it. Trump unilaterally decided to begin direct high-level talks with Russia in February, cutting both Ukraine and his NATO partners out of negotiations. The president's essential idea to end the war was to first implement a 30-day general ceasefire, which in turn would pave the way for broader peace negotiations. This was first proposed in March, which Zelenskyy quickly accepted in exchange for the resumption of US military aid and intelligence sharing, while Putin responded by laying out a series of conditions, demanding, among other things, that Ukraine not use those 30 days to continue forced mobilization, get weapons supplies, and prepare its mobilized units. This apparently led to a scaled-down US proposal for a 30-day moratorium, limited only to a tax on energy infrastructure and Black Sea shipping. While Putin and Zelenskyy tentatively agreed to the former, both sides immediately accused the other of violations. And more importantly, the deal itself barely affected what was happening on the front lines, where Russia is slowly making advances, having nearly encircled Ukraine's stronghold in Kursk at the beginning of March. Russia has already decimated Ukraine's energy infrastructure, and the frequency of such strikes was always going to decline once winter had passed, because that's precisely the time of year that would cause Ukraine's civilians and soldiers the most pain. Meanwhile, the Black Sea deal was no more than an amuse-bouche, as Ukraine had already driven Russia's navy out of it. What's more, the deal quickly seemed to have fallen through, with Putin refusing to agree to its implementation without sanctions relief from the West. Putin also caused controversy when he added another prerequisite, that elections in Ukraine should be held before a peace deal is signed, arguing that Zelenskyy, quote, lacks the legitimacy to sign a peace deal. In response, and in one of the first outbursts of annoyance towards Putin, Trump said in an interview with NBC News that he was very angry and pissed off that Putin had questioned Zelenskyy's legitimacy as president. Trump also threatened secondary tariffs on Russian oil if he was unable to make a deal with Putin, and if he came to believe that Putin was purposefully avoiding a ceasefire. Many had hoped that this would be the case, and the US administration did renew existing sanctions, but Trump avoided any further pressure on Putin. In fact, despite Trump's growing impatience with Russia, Trump and his administration has so far only really applied pressure on Ukraine, and Trump has, on multiple occasions, blamed Ukraine for apparently initiating the war. We saw this earlier in the year during the heated Oval Office meeting between Trump and Zelenskyy, which was followed by Trump briefly cutting all US military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine. However, reports suggest that not everyone in Trump's inner circle is necessarily on the same page here. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Special Envoy for Russia and Ukraine Keith Kellogg have allegedly pushed for a more hardline approach towards Russia, but Trump's Special Envoy Steve Witkoff has resisted this effort and has been accused by Zelenskyy of spreading Russian narratives. In an interview with Tucker Carlson in late March, for instance, Witkoff opened the door to giving up all 4 Ukrainian oblasts when he claimed that all 4 were Russian-speaking and had referenda suggesting that they wanted to be under Russian rule. This is despite the fact that Witkoff couldn't actually even remember what Zaporizhia and Kherson were called, and obviously the referenda that Russia held in these territories, in the middle of a war, only took place in Russian-occupied areas, so it's incredibly unlikely that they were actually fair. Meanwhile, Trump has continued to bash Zelenskyy and attempted to pressure the Ukrainian president into signing a deal that would force Ukraine to hand over to a US investment fund half of the revenue from its natural resources, ports, pipelines, and other infrastructure until it repays a cost estimate for America's military aid. While the two sides did sign a memorandum of intent on a mineral deal framework last week, there were no details about any security guarantees from Washington, which was one of Zelenskyy's original conditions for the minerals deal. Then, just last Friday, the US president told reporters in the Oval Office that he was not expecting a truce to happen in a specific number of days, but he wanted it done quickly. His comments came hours after Rubio warned that the US would abandon talks unless there were clear signs of progress within days. While Vice President J.D. Vance told Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni on Friday that he felt optimistic that a ceasefire deal would be secured soon, both Rubio and Witkoff are now saying that the two sides have barely moved from their opening positions. So why have these negotiations fallen short? Well, the way we see it, the main reason is that Trump has been unable to squeeze any concessions out of Putin. Forcing Ukraine to the negotiating table was always going to be relatively easy. After all, the US has a whole lot of leverage over Ukraine as its most important military ally. But getting Russia to agree to the concessions was always going to be the difficult part. And so far, Trump's strategy, which has mostly consisted of proverbial carrots, including personal calls with Putin, talking up the economic benefits of US-Russia normalization, and parroting Kremlin talking points, has fallen short. Trump has already ruled out both Ukraine's accession to NATO and a post-ceasefire American security guarantee, but Putin has still refused to shift on his maximalist war aims. Similarly, after every ceasefire negotiation, Putin has come out with a long list of conditions before any ceasefire is actually implemented, and it's beginning to look like Putin just doesn't want the war to end anytime soon. Reports suggest that Trump is now going to offer yet more carrots to Putin in a final effort to secure a ceasefire, with Bloomberg reporting last Friday that his administration was preparing a final offer involving US recognition of Russian-occupied Crimea, as well as a complete freeze of the current front lines. And this might work. As we're writing this, there are reports that Putin is considering accepting a freeze along the current front lines. Nonetheless, there are two big caveats worth mentioning here. First, Putin signaled that he would accept previous ceasefires, only to produce a long list of additional demands which scuppered negotiations. And second, with no proverbial sticks hanging over his head, what's to stop Putin restarting the war at his convenience sometime in the future? Ultimately, there's a lot to unpack here, with this story reported on by more than 240 sources. Interestingly, we can see that 28% of those came from left-leaning outlets, while 34% came from outlets that lean right. Looking at the headlines, you can see some differences too, with right-leaning outlets highlighting Trump's optimism for a deal, presenting potential peace talks as positive developments, even headlining "Peace is the price," while left-leaning outlets continue to question the sincerity of Putin's Easter truce, particularly when juxtaposed with Trump's hopeful outlook. We're able to do that because of our sponsor, Ground News, whose incredible website and app lets you discover the news and pulls back the curtain on media bias. Built by a former NASA engineer on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news, Ground News ingests over 50,000 articles from around the world and then organizes them each by story. For each and every story, you can see the number of sources reporting, where those sources lean on the political spectrum at an individual and group level, compare the headlines of each source, and read each article without ever leaving the app. But one of the best parts of the app is their blind spot feed. It presents you with stories and articles that haven't been reported on one side of the aisle or the other, helping you better break out of your media bubble and discover what those on the other side of the political spectrum are really saying. Ground News is such a useful tool for our current media landscape, and I think an app like this will only become more essential as the media landscape continues to evolve. So if you're interested in everything that Ground News has to offer, you can get 40% off the unlimited access Vantage plan using the link in the description, or by scanning the QR code. This offer is only available here, so make sure you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.